Well, good morning to people on the West Coast and good afternoon to people joining us from Europe. First, let me actually give you the schedule of the AI seminar for the rest of the month. We will have Kristina Gligoric talking next Friday. So please join us again next Friday and for the remainder of the month as well. But today I'm really pleased to present and welcome to AI seminars Guiseppe Russo. Guiseppe is a postdoctoral research fellow at the EPFL in Bob West's group. Many of us know him really well. His research spans causal inference, machine learning, and broader impacts of AI on society and individuals. Specifically, he's going to be talking about his focus on understanding the effects of content moderation in online social networks. His research extends machine learning methods like causal inference to decision-making processes related to health and sustainability. So I actually met Giuseppe's his PhD advisor from Frank Schweitzer from ETH Zurich, where Giuseppe got his PhD degree. And where, and Frank is actually a physics-based, he's a physicist studying social systems right now. So there's a lot of like intellectual overlap between our groups and Frank's as well. So yes, so welcome, Giuseppe, and I look forward to your talk.
Okay. Thanks, Christina, first of all, for inviting me. It's a huge pleasure for me to give this talk at the AI seminar at ISI. And as Christina was saying, today I will be talking about the value of causal inference to inform curation practices, and in particular, content moderation in online social platforms. So let me start to take a step back and go back in time of roughly 2000 years. So the concept of causality was already crystallized by Aristotle roughly 2000 years ago in his works, The Physics, where he already assumed that to have true knowledge about a specific phenomena, we need to understand its causes. And specifically, he chose the word in ancient Greek, aithia, which today we could translate it to causes, but its true meaning, it's answers to why questions. And why questions are really at the basis of causal inference. Because what causal inference wants to do is to provide explanations to these kind of questions. And as I will post today during this talk, this kind of explanation can prompt us to solutions for the biggest societal challenges that we have to face today. And examples of these questions that actually to all of us today probably are radicalization of people online or offline and polarization in social systems. So let me give you an example of the value of causal inference and why identifying one causal law is typically more powerful than identifying dozens of correlational patterns. And I want to do that like with a simple example where we imagine to be a user at risk of radicalization that joins on online platforms and then access to the feed of this platform. And what can happen to these users is that it can be a risk of radicalization for two possible reasons. One, it engages in discussions with other users that are already more radical than him, so it gets directly exposed to more radical content, or indirect exposure because it simply reads radical contents present on the platform, provided by the recommender system of the platform itself, right? So to test this kind of hypothesis, we could train a model that, based on the feed at time t and the information, the online information about the user at time t, can predict the radicalization level of the same user at times t+1, assuming that we can, of course, operationalize radicalization. And finding a positive correlation in this scenario would lead us to conclude that the recommender system radicalizes users. And therefore, since we would not want a recommender system that creates societal harm, then our decision would be, simplifying a lot clearly, to change the recommender system. However, this finding would only be robust in absence of spurious correlations, meaning that the online data about the users that we collected are completely representative of the human behavior. And we could find an alternative explanation for this kind of correlation. The user might be radicalizing offline in the real world, and then when getting to the platform, looking either to interact with users that are as radical as him, or directly looking up for content that it's radical. And then in that case, the recommender system would simply does its job, which is providing the content that the user wants. So what would happen is that if we changed the recommender system, we would have zero impact on the radicalization level of the user. So basically, we would not be able to prevent the radicalization of this user. And this is why understanding the causal mechanism behind this radicalization process is necessary to make effective decisions. So about why identifying causal effects, causal mechanism, it's difficult. It's difficult already because of its definition. Actually, in practice, it's impossible. So what we would need to do is to take our observation, take an action, and measure the effect of this action of an outcome of interest, whatever outcome that is. And then what we would like to do in order to measure this causal effect would be to go back in time, undo the action A, and measure again the outcome. The difference between these two words, the one that we observed and the counterfactual, would be the causal effect. Now, given that time travels right now are not really an option, we would need to resort to other options. And one of the most common options are randomized controlled experiments, where basically we create two groups. One is called treatment group, which is actually affected by the action. You can imagine users, and we force this user to interact with other users on the platform at random, and the control group, which are users that are not affected by the action that we want to study. And basically, this randomized process of assigning this action at random guarantees us that the difference between that on average, there is no difference between the treatment and the control group, but for the action. So if there is a change in behavior between these groups, that's the causal effect, and that could only have been caused by the action itself. The issue is that randomized control experiments are rarely doable, both for feasibility reason and for ethical reason. So assume that we want to understand if users exposed to radical content become more radical. It would be completely unethical to force users to randomly interact with radical users, right? Someone might not particularly enjoy to talk with someone that starts to offend him badly. So then we have to resort necessary to observational studies. But obtaining causal knowledge from observational studies is particularly challenging because basic assumption of causal inference are violated in this context, starting with the randomization I was talking about. And these challenges indeed require us to answer to questions like how to identify causal effects in absence of controlled trials, how to interpret causal mechanisms and then inform decisions, and finally, how to evaluate these decisions, how these decisions affect the system that we want to study. And these three questions are questions that I always keep present in my research, and I will show you today how I try to address them in each kind of research question that I face. So the focus of today will be about content moderation, and typically the target of content moderation are fringe communities. Fringe communities have got the spotlight recently because they have been the main actors of multiple domestic terroristic attacks that have been done across the globe in multiple countries. And they typically gather online and organize there. So the question that many platforms had is how to effectively moderate these fringe communities. And to answer to this question, today I would like to bring you on a trip through the life cycle of one of these fringe community, which is the incels community, and we will follow it on a specific platform that it's Reddit. For those who are not really familiar with Reddit, Reddit is a online social network. If you have an online social network where there are like multiple subgroups, communities, typically called subreddits, that discuss a specific topic. Incels was and is a community characterized by misogyny and hate against women, and members of this community have been main actors in the organization of domestic terroristic attacks through the globe. So it was created around 2014 on Reddit. Then it grew roughly in the 4 years later. And finally in 2019, after the community got the spotlight because of these terrorist attacks, it got banned from the platform, and some of these users regrouped in external platforms where no moderation occurred. So today I want to show you the value of understanding causal mechanisms, analyzing different phases of this life cycle. And in particular, I will start with community growth. So what is very interesting of community growth is that during this period, Reddit actually silently moderated the community, reducing its visibility, removing it from the main feed. But what we observe is that the community was still growing in terms of users. And then we must ask ourselves why. What actually caused or contributed at least to the growth of this community? And we hypothesized the existence of what we called fringe interactions. We define fringe interactions as an exchange of comments between incels, that for simplicity, for generality, we call fringe, and non-fringe users, where this exchange of comments, as you can see in the picture here, occurred outside of the fringe community. For example, here the non-fringe user posted some comment and received an answer from users already active on the incels community. And this interaction occurred in another community, in this case, men advice. And then the question that we ask is, do fringe interactions lead the non-fringe user to post on fringe communities? So are like fringe interaction the cause of why users are joining incels during this period? Our analysis went deeper. I will not directly discuss about these two questions that dealt with with identifying the characteristics that make these external communities more susceptible to fringe interactions, meaning what are the best fishing grounds for incels. And we also analyzed which linguistic traits make these fringe interactions more successful. But of course, if you want to talk about it, I'm happy to discuss this in the Q&A or go deeper into this. So to answer to these questions, we need to go back to our causality framework. First, what we have are observed interactions. We know if a non-fringe user interacted with a fringe user. And we know we can also measure if after this interaction, the non-fringe user actually posted on the fringe community, meaning incels in this time. And we consider posting as a strong signal that the user actually joined the community. Now, what we would like to compare this outcome to is its counterfactual, where basically everything happened exactly the same, but for the fact that the non-fringe user never interacted with the fringe user from incel. And then in this scenario, we would like once again measure the outcome, meaning if the user joined incels or not. Of course, this is, as said before, unfeasible because we cannot create parallel worlds, and it would be also impossible to do randomized experiment. Still, we want to get to get these answers. We want to understand if this was a mechanism for the growth of the community. And we get inspired by this framework by matching users. So basically what we want to do is to take users, to take a non-fringe user one that interacted with a fringe users from incels and match it with another user that is similar with the users that interacted in all aspects, but the fact that the non-fringe user never received an interaction with users from incels. This should be the only difference between these matched pairs. And this will mimic what I introduced before, meaning the comparison between our observational and counterfactual world. When doing that, however, we have like two huge issues. Number one, not all users interact with non-fringe users at the same time. And this is a very complicated problem in causal inference, and I'm happy to go deep into this problem like later in the Q&A. And second, an always standing problem in this kind of analysis, which are confounders. We might end up comparing users that are too different. And one confounder in this case could be what the user write in their comments. For example, if the non-fringe user non-fringe user one would write something completely different from the other non-fringe user, it might stimulate, so it might increase its chances of getting an interaction from the fringe user, making the matched pairs not comparable because the matched user would not have the same chance of getting the fringe interaction, which could be seen as a treatment in this case. So to obtain good matched pairs where the only difference existing between the pairs is exactly the fact that the user in the treatment group received the fringe interaction while the others didn't, we use balanced risk set matching. And what we do is, in the first place, we fine-tune a BERT model on the language of incels users. Then we use the same model to embed the comments that received or not the interaction from a fringe user. And then we concatenate these embeddings with user covariates, which can be the participation in specific groups, the average toxicity, and many others. And using this model, we predict the probability of a user of receiving a fringe interaction. Once we call this probability propensity score, and we create matches using one nearest neighbor. So basically, we match users from the treatment and the control group that have similar probability of receiving a fringe interaction. This procedure guarantees that we are restoring the properties of randomized control trials, meaning that a priori, we have two groups of users that have same chances of receiving the treatment, which in this case, with an abuse of language, is the fringe interaction. So on this match sample, we can then run our simple regression analysis where YIT represents, it's a binary variable that tells us that it's 1 if the user actually joined the incels, 0 otherwise, and beta 1 captures this increasing probability of posting on incels after having interacted with an incel user. And what we obtain here is an increase of 4.4% of probability of posting on incels, meaning that for this specific community, the fact that users interacted with incels users somewhere else on Reddit actually increased their probability of joining incels itself. Now, I actually lied to you because we care, of course, about incels, but when we go for causal studies, we want to somehow understand if these kind of mechanisms are general. And therefore, our interest is more in fringe communities rather than on a single specific community. And so we conducted the same analysis the same analysis for two other communities, meaning the Donald and gender critical. And we found a similar effect, which is roughly which on average, considering all three communities, set up to 3% increase in probability of posting on these fringe communities. Now, someone might claim that, yeah, like this effect exists, but this is not a property of fringe communities, but it could be a property of every community on Reddit because of some property of the platform itself. So to avoid this concern, we have reproduced the same analysis, but instead of using fringe communities, we consider non-fringe communities. And in particular, we consider League of Legends, NBA, climate change. Let me spell out for you. Basically, this means that we consider an interaction by a user of climate change and another user on the platform, on Reddit, and then we checked if this user actually joined climate change or not. And differently from fringe communities, we didn't find a statistically significant effect. Also, or in this case, when we consider the entire effect throughout the entire time window that we considered, it tends to be very small. But when stratified for time, it becomes completely not statistically significant. I think there is a question, so stop 1 second. So Keith asked, have you checked whether propensity score matching also ensures their users are themselves similar? The probability of treatment could be similar without the features being themselves similar, which might violate the as if random assumption. So Keith, when you say like themselves similar, you mean with the user itself?
I'm sorry, I should be clear. I mean, if the treatment and control users are similar, there's of course a lot of literature comparing propensity score matching to something like Mahalanobis distance matching, and each of them have their strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. Yeah, so you're okay. So you're asking if this is so you're asking if basically this effect it's robust towards variation of the matching procedure.
Or another way to put it is just simpler, even if you've compared the features of the control and treatment and saw if they were similar.
Oh yeah. We did it. I have a slide in the I can show it to you later if you want.
Yeah,
but
we're gonna
I have a
talk about
slide where we actually check this. We also checked changing the method. So because of course propensity score matching has some limitations clearly. So we did direct matching also in the embedding space directly, and the effect that we found were not statistically significant different from what I'm showing here.
Great.
Osel asks, does the effect increase with multiple interactions? So this is thanks for the answer. This is a great question. So we didn't check with multiple interactions. Rationale behind it was first, it was very difficult because it would have required to add another basically covariate when we were matching treatment and control, because the treatment would be different. But also we were interested in the effect of the very first interaction. So I would say, but this is more speculation, that if already the first interaction has some effect, I think multiple interaction would not change the value, the sign of the effect. But yeah, that's absolutely something that it would be nice to check.
It would change. It may change the effect, no, the size of the effect. No, if this person interact with one kind of fringe community or with 10 fringe community people, probably is more likely to join the community. Yeah, I mean, I think we're interested to look at that.
Oh, okay. So you're saying if he gets more interaction by different people from
the same or different people, but multiple times, you would imagine it would be somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes complete sense. Okay, so basically, now the effect might seem small, but the point here is exactly asking if this causal mechanism is prevalent enough to justify the existence of a moderation policy, right? And what we measured here is of all newcomers that join incels and the other communities in the period that we considered, which portion of those newcomers joined because it received a fringe interaction. And we found that roughly 5% of the users joined because of them, which means 1 every 20 users joined after receiving a fringe interaction. So this is like a big portion of the population of users that actually joined one fringe community in this setting. Of course, like developing a clear moderation policy here, it's cumbersome in the sense that like we could quarantine users as it's done already, like in Reddit, there is quarantine, but for community, we could do it at user level. On the other hand, this might backfire, right? And this will link us to the second part of the talk where we evaluate the effect of one of these decisions on the system. And it could backfire because it would be perceived by these people probably as censorship. And these external platforms like Parler, Gab, or whatever typically attract users with the arguments like, we provide free speech. You can join our platform because we don't censor you, right? And as I will show in the second part of this talk, these might really backfire. So I will move now to the second part of the life cycle I introduced at the beginning, and basically, like, we analyzed the community growth. We have found this effect, and what we know that actually happened in practice is that Reddit implemented 2 moderation policies, quarantine and banning, and we will focus on banning today. And we would like to evaluate the effect that this kind of policy had on the system. So there are like previous work that showed that banning worked, reducing the presence of hate speech on the platform, but these findings holds only if like one subtle assumption is respected, which is online migration, it's equal to physical migration. So let me unpack this slowly. So when we are on Reddit, that we consider as a mainstream platform, and the incels community is banned, users of the community are still free to use the platform. It's just the web page that is removed. So these users can migrate to alternative communities in the same platform and keep posting on Reddit. Alternatively, what they can do is to move to other platforms, to fringe platforms where no moderation occurs, and start posting there. And from the perspective of the mainstream platform, this might seem ideal, right? At the end, they are getting rid of the user that they didn't want. But as I was saying, this really works well if we assume that users can be in one place at a time, which is never the case in the online world, right? Users are just one tab away from being at 2 places, from being in 2 platforms at the same time. And this is the case of coactive users. Coactive users here are those users that after the banning remained active on Reddit, but followed the community on fringe platforms. And therefore, we ask ourselves if these coactive users might threaten the efficacy of the banning as a moderation policy. Basically, we're asking if coactive users are the cause of possible spillovers of antisocial behaviors from the fringe platform back onto the mainstream platform. And we operationalized antisocial behavior using toxicity, which is a discussed but well-known measure computed via the Google Perspective API, and another measure that we consider, which we called engagement, which can be qualitatively understood as the number of posts that after the banning the users make in communities that are somehow related to the community that was banned, for example, incels. And so now to actually understand if there was a causal effect, if there is a causal effect generated by the coactivity of users on the presence of antisocial behavior on the mainstream platform, we have to do 3 steps. Number 1, we have to collect data. This was major effort because first we have to collect data from 3-band subreddit. Our incels are the Donald and are gender critical. And we had to scrape the corresponding platform to which these the users of these subreddits migrated after the banning, meaning incels.is, the Donald.win, overit.com. Second, we identify coactive users, which are those that posted on the banned subreddit. So they were users of either incels, the Donald, or gender critical. They remained active on the mainstream platform after the banning. And they actually, as you can see in the figure on the left side, on the right side, started to post on the fringe platform exclusively after the banning. And we compared them with similar users, meaning that they posted on the same banned subreddit. They kept posting on the mainstream platform, but differently, they never posted on the fringe platform. And in this case, we finally estimate the causal effect of coactivity by using a propensity score and a difference in difference. In particular, we take the coactive users and the Reddit-only users, and for each of them, we compute based on user characteristic, language features, and network features, their probability of posting on the fringe community after the banning. Based on this score, as we did in the previous example, we match these users with a one-to-one nearest neighbor. Once that we have this match sample, we then conduct a regression analysis using difference in difference, checking to understand what was the effect of being coactive of one of these measures of antisocial behaviors, meaning toxicity and engagement. And here I will focus mainly on toxicity today because it's easier to understand, but if you want more information about engagement, as always, I'm happy to give more clarification about it. So what we found was pretty surprising and scaring, because so here in this plot, what you see is on the x-axis is the time span that we consider, which are 36 weeks. And on the y-axis, you see the increment in toxicity of the Reddit-only and coactive groups in the mainstream platform, meaning on Reddit. So you see that in the pre-event period, so before week 0, before the week, I received a question, I'll answer in a sec. So before week 0, meaning before the banning, that it's centered at 0, the toxicity of this group were basically equal. There was no difference between these two groups. After the banning occurred, coactive users and Reddit-only users had a spike in their increment of toxicity. But what is even more surprising is that we observe a divergence of this effect, of this difference. Because coactive use, while Reddit-only remain stable in their incremented toxicity in the weeks after the banning, in the case of coactive users, we observe this increase in toxicity. So what might happen is that users are more and more exposed to radical content on the fringe community, and therefore this kind of radical content this extreme content is spillovering from the fringe platform onto the mainstream platform. And this is a clear limitation and a clear unintended consequence of the banning. So is the rationale of using K-core centrality and how the network was constructed. So this was mainly from previous works that showed that there is a correlation between where users are in the network, where they are placed in the networks, as a correlation with the fact that then users join the platform. Sorry, the fringe platform when a banning occurred. So we wanted to account for that because the previous work pointed out that this was an important feature, and we didn't want to leave it out to avoid possible issues in terms of omitted variable bias. That was the rationale behind it. So now what we get out of this study, actually, one thing, like this divergence actually generalized across all communities that we studied. So this was true both for gender critical, for incels, and for the Donald. So we observed this spillover due to coactivity throughout all these communities. So basically, what we obtain out of this analysis is that community level bans are no silver bullet. And also what we get is actually a clear target to understand the extent to which banning can be effective. And particularly these target are coactive users. Of course, this was a complicated analysis, and I like to think that in science results are a bit like people, and there are limitations. And in particular here, there are incorrect labeling of Reddit-only users and the fact that results may not generalize to users who do not maintain their usernames. So in general, the contributions of this approach that I try to generalize across multiple domains is that we want to provide actionable insights on how to improve online social platforms. In this case, we have fringe interactions and the moderation of coactive users. And in terms of method, like what I keep trying to do is to bridge this gap between natural language processing and causal inference in order to mitigate possible issues coming from unmeasured confounders that can clearly be a threat to the validity of this kind of analysis. So in terms of outlook, something that I removed because I wanted to keep the talk a bit light and have time to discuss with you is that in the life cycle of these fringe communities, I only put that after the migration, people actually, after the banning, after the moderation, people actually migrate to fringe fringe platforms. Actually, this is not the entire picture because there is a part of people that after the banning starts to join recovery communities where in this place they start to tell the story and start to explain why they do not align, why they change their beliefs towards the fringe community. And we started to do a first analysis on this, checking if there is a causal effect on banning in pushing, in a sense of nudging users towards joining these recovery communities. But this is still preliminary, so I didn't want to include it, but I think it's very tempting and super exciting as a research direction. And in terms of outlook, I'm right now looking actually at the effect of AI-generated text on users' decision, right? Because what we know as of today is that social media are full of AI-generated text. And that's, of course, interesting. But for me, the most relevant, the biggest value is to understand if the effect of AI-generated text is more powerful compared to what people write. We did like a small study. If you want to check it, there is the QR code here on an unrelated topic, but about generated text, where we show that reviews generated with LLMs boost the acceptance score of papers in peer review system. It's something to think about, but it can definitely be applied also to social media. And that's the direction where I'm trying to go. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take all the questions.
Thanks, Giuseppe. That was really fascinating talk. I'm going to kick off the questions while people gather their thoughts. So does the ban in general had any impact on Reddit itself? Was there like a decrease in toxicity overall in Reddit?
No, sorry, I lost.
So once the communities were banned, you said these communities became violent. Actually, if you go back to your toxicity analysis, yeah, there you go. So I know, like, the toxicity analysis probably does not capture what you were mentioning before, that these communities, incel fringe communities, became violent in their language. But after the ban, actually, so they kind of poisoned the overall language on Reddit. So after the ban, did the overall language of Reddit become less violent and less extreme?
So here, like this would be like your question would be perfectly complemented from the other measure. So the overall language on Reddit didn't become more extreme, but like for this specific category of users, it did. And it didn't become on Reddit overall more toxic, but in subreddits, like we checked the 50 subreddits that were closer in using a similarity measure to incels. In those 50 subreddits, these users became more toxic compared even to the baseline toxicity of those subreddits.
After the ban?
After the ban, yes.
Mm-hmm. So because they were learning kind of new norms in their
So I think like I think so. Right after the banning, and this is like a finding that it's known, it happens often. They all got more toxic, right? Both the coactive and Reddit only are more toxic, and the statistical difference between these two groups is still small, right? Like there is still a big overlap. But then in times, we observe like this divergence. Of course, it's very difficult to say that they were radicalizing more and more in the other platform and bringing this content back, because this would require a study of like dosage and response, right? The more radical content you get in the fringe platform, the more you become radical on the mainstream platform as well. We did this only for one of the communities, which is the Donald, and we found exactly this, but I cannot claim it for all communities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Questions? There's a question in the Q&A.
Yes, so Nathan, it could work. How do you account for moderation practices within each communities and react to these spillovers? Okay, Nathan, here you mean these spillovers in the subreddit after the banning, correct?
I wonder if I can actually try to get to unmute. Okay, actually, Nathan, I unmuted you. You can ask the question directly.
Cool. Okay, yeah, I guess I'm curious about the moderators within the communities that were experiencing the spillover effects. Say once incels was banned, the other communities that those coactive users were going into.
Okay, thanks for the question. Yeah, that's very interesting. So it goes a bit back to what I was saying before. So the good part of this effect was that in a sense it was, or at least how we measured it, it was confined to a neighborhood of communities that was somehow related to incels. So for example, far-right communities that didn't get banned, or conservative communities. So in those cases, the moderators never interacted with the users. So we checked the number of comments that were actually removed, and was very low. So we have like a very, very low number of comments removed in that period.
Mm-hmm. Keith has a question.
Keith also, sorry, I didn't see it because it was in the chat.
Oh no, I just asked, or I just posted it, and maybe it's easier if I just say it. So the basic question I have is, how do you account for survivorship bias in a plot like what you show here? Namely, I've seen at least some evidence in another paper called "You Can't Stay Here" that a lot of users leave after a subreddit is banned. So are those users removed from the analysis, or are you including both users who leave and users who don't?
Those are removed from the analysis. You see it here, right? Like step 2, one requirement is that user keep posting on
I see.
Reddit after the ban.
Do you think that could lead to some sort of do you think that could affect the plot that you're showing? Because effectively, the users who leave would be akin to posting zero toxic content.
So it's absolutely a good point. I don't think it affects the plot. However, it goes, if I can, it goes a bit in this section of the limitation, especially in the second part. I think like here the reasoning should be which person, like before applying a ban, ideally it would be great to somehow predict which portion of the user base of these communities will become coactive. If it's really small, then we will have like a small effect due to this coactiveness, right? So it would be worth to ban. If that's not the case, then these kind of spillovers might become problematic. And this goes a bit back to what you were saying, right? Like which portion of the users that we are considering can, in principle, be actors of these spillovers. But I don't think it bias the analysis because it's like we matched users, like coactive and Reddit only users, right? So like the effect it's restricted to these kind of to these categories of users, which have as a characteristic the fact that they remained active.
And well, so you're, in other words, you're matching users post-treatment effectively.
No, I'm matching users pre-treatment.
Okay, good. And so the coactive users, you do take into account that some coactive users could leave as well. Or are you only considering you're considering the users who stay on Reddit who are both coactive and non-coactive users, right?
I mean, like eliminate people who stopped posting entirely, who disappeared.
Yes.
After the treatment, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks to you.
I'll go while we wait for next week. I'll go in your first study, like about fringe and non-fringe users. What is the exact mechanism for why the interaction with the fringe user would actually make people start? Do they see the name of the post?
Yeah. So we did because this was fun. So we actually looked both at the discussion that they had. I think this is Luca. So the discussion that they had, and users typically click on their, like it happens the users click on the username of the people like they got an answer. And this I didn't know, but when you do this on Reddit, you see basically the list of all posts made by the other user. So and you see, sorry, like you see the post made by the other user and in which communities, in which subreddits these posts were made. So it's very easy to get there.
Do you also check for the presence of links in the
Yeah, it happens
links
also.
to the
It happened also because like in another analysis that we did. So this so if I go 1 second more technical, like in the spillover analysis, one of the main concern is that there might be other characteristics, I don't know, gender, political ideology, that could confound this analysis, right? Because assume that like if you are more far right, you increase your chances of migrating, following the community, meaning of being coactive. And at the same time, you're also increasing the chances of being more toxic. So this would be like a perfect definition of confounder, right? But given that here we have panel data, we added this UI term, which are fixed effects, which control for anything that remained constant during the time span that we considered. Given that the time span is not particularly long, it was okay to consider these characteristics fixed. I think it wasn't like the biggest assumption. In this case, instead, we couldn't do this because we didn't have like a panel data. And we did multiple robustness checks, and one of these robustness checks was exactly done using links. So basically what we did, so the most tricky part in the analysis is like matching for the content, of course, right? Because then you have to do manual checking and so on. So to avoid that, basically we obtain a sample where the content of the non-fringe user, one, the non-fringe user, two, so basically those that we match are exactly the same content, meaning the same link. So we use URLs to match. So if two users posted exactly the same URLs and one received fringe interaction and the other not, then for sure we have ruled out all confounders that can come from text because it's exactly the same link. So in this case, yeah, links are like a portion of this
Sure.
dynamic.
I also meant like links to the communities, but to fringe communities that might be
directly linked to the fringe community. No, at least I didn't find. No, I don't know, but like I didn't find. I find though articles to news outlets talking about incels and advertising this community. Like outside link, yes, I found it.
Okay. I guess that's Luca, not Giuseppe, has listed. You have a question? You should be able to speak. Hello? The ghost of you is not speaking.
No, it's me asking myself questions.
No, it doesn't
No.
work.
All right. Any other questions?
I have like a generic question. So what's the solution here? Is like to follow these users that were in one of these banned subreddits and then have additional moderation on them?
So
they kind of increase the toxicity of the spillover. I mean, the other Reddits, subreddits that they go.
So for me, like a solution, also like I want to show them. So the solution might be given to this analysis. So basically we analyzed that we stratified the effect of fringe interactions across different characteristics of these communities where the interaction happens. I did it, for example, for incels. Basically here you observe that this effect for incels is stronger for very right-leaning communities, young communities, so where users are young, and male. Okay, so basically we have buckets containing subreddits where this effect is stronger. And for example, a possibility could be to, which is already at the community level, it already exists in Reddit, which is quarantine, to quarantine users, basically to make for them more difficult to post on these communities, like to see these communities, so that you somehow remove these phishing grounds for them. And you can target
quarantine. Is that like a Reddit global thing, or it's like the editor of the other subreddit?
No. Quarantine is a Reddit moderation policy that exists already. But at community level, not a user level. So it's never targeted on the user. It's just the community that is quarantined.
I think people in room 689, you can unmute yourself now. Should be able to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Great talk, Giuseppe. I would like to go back to the last slide. And I was wondering if you could, first of all, elaborate a bit more on these potential moderation strategies that you mentioned before. And a follow-up question is if you think that these results will generalize in other platforms, or if you think that these specific moderation strategies that you have in mind could generalize to diverse platforms. I don't know, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other mainstream platforms, but also other fringe platforms as well. So I want to, I mean, it's probably going to be a speculation about that, but I want to know your point of view.
Okay, so first question is like about how would be possible to implement this moderation on the platforms, correct?
Yeah, if you can elaborate more on this two intervention that you mentioned in the slide.
So, so for the first one, which is curtailing fringe interactions, you could basically not like one simple intervention could be not showing in the feed of this user that you target the communities where fringe interactions are more effective, right? So you have to, like, you really want to go there and post on that community. So that would I guess that this would really reduce this effect, because from what by looking at the data, I don't think that these people are commenting to recruit other people. It's not they are going there and they want to attract them on purpose, right? So I think that just go to these communities and they post there, and then a discussion starts, at least from what I have read in by looking at the data. So by hiding these communities from the feed, it means that they really have to make a active choice in going there and post in this. This would be like a first version of how I would try to implement it, and it wouldn't be particularly difficult, I think. And then for the coactive users, I think like in terms of the coactiveness, it's a bit different, right? So of course, when you make an intervention, you are changing the system. And the purpose of causal studies is to understand how the system will change once that you have made one of such decision, right? And in this case, already identifying an unintended consequence is a contribution to moderation. Speculating on how this could be addressed, it goes a bit back to what I was saying to Keith, where I think it's possible, given that we did it in a sense, in a way, is try to predict in case of banning which portion of the user base will not survive, meaning they will abandon the platform, or they will migrate to the other platform. And this can give you like an upper bound on the effect, on the possible effect of coactivity. And based on the upper bound, you can judge if and when implement banning. This could be an option. Other more creative solutions would be to create, given that we are in the era of LLMs, is to create simulated environments and try to deploy their interventions. But this, I think it's a bit more complicated than futuristic. So I don't want to look like I'm inventing a new spaceship to go to Mars.
Just replace all the users with LLMs, let them talk to each other.
Yeah, but I mean, that sounds also a bit wishy-washy, right? It's like that opens up other big questions. There are like LLMs, can LLMs mimic user behavior online? I think it's a PhD and maybe work to prove itself. But I think these are doable in a sense.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Very good questions. So let's actually thank our speaker for the really wonderful and fascinating talk. Where's for interactions? I don't know how to get, but good job, Giuseppe. And I look forward to certainly to talking to you.
There is a question from Emilio, actually.
Oh, good. Okay, Emilio.
I didn't know this.
Allowed to talk. Yeah. Okay. Good. You can talk.
It wasn't a question. It was the only interaction that I could find on the platform as a just say hi and good job.
Indeed, Emilio listened already to this.
Yes.
So I was scared of your question, Emilio. Like I got scared.
I already asked you all my questions at your PhD defense. So I think you had enough. All right.
I'm happy it was only interaction. I got scared, but thanks.
Thanks. All right. Thank you, Giuseppe. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.